Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have with us Dr. Michael New. He's with the Charlotte Lozier Institute. He's a fellow with the Witherspoon Institute and has a Ph.D. in political science and a master's degree in statistics from Stanford University. He's written on the proposed Medicaid expansion in Alaska, staying on top of that atrocious decision or move in that direction. Of course, the Governor Walker of the state, suggesting now that through executive action he can do it himself, even though the legislature refused to go along with his plan. Dr. New, thank you for being on the Joe Miller Show, being willing to talk about this important subject.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I appreciate it.
So why don't you give our audience an update on what the governor here in Alaska is suggesting he can do with respect to the Medicaid expansion?
Well, sure. Essentially, if you kind of go back to when the Affordable Care Act was passed, I guess back in 2010, and it did sort of allocate some federal money to help subsidize Medicaid expansion in the states. And there was some subsequent legal action that was taken. And what the Supreme Court ruled was that states don't have to expand Medicaid. It's up to the state legislature, the governor, to make that decision on their own. And about 29 or 30 states have already expanded Medicaid, but others have not. And the Alaska legislature met and decided that by and large this was a bad idea and opted not to expand Medicaid in the state. The governor right now seems to be of the opinion that he can just bypass the legislature and accept the federal money and expand Medicaid unilaterally. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I know the legislature has passed language that's going to try to make that difficult for him. I expect there to be lawsuits about this. But right now, Governor Walker seems to be of the opinion that he can just simply go ahead, bypass the legislature, and expand Medicaid unilaterally in the state.
A political scientist, you've got a Ph.D., Stanford. I'm not sure how engaged you are in the political scene here in Alaska, but it just blows me away that this is a guy, Governor Walker, who has at least historically proclaimed to be pro-life, and yet he knows, he has to understand that this Medicaid expansion will mean more state-funded abortions in the state of Alaska. I just find it atrocious that he could be doing this. Tell our audience a little bit about what you expect as far as increase of a state-funded abortion if, in fact, he's able to expand Medicaid by the swipe of a pen.
I mean, essentially, I think this is something that should be of tremendous concern to pro-lifers. Alaska is one of about 17 states that publicly funds abortion through Medicaid. That federal, dollars don't go to abortion by and large. But again, states can decide on their own whether or not they want to fund abortion through their own state Medicaid program. And Alaska is about one of 17 states where if you're a woman and you're on Medicaid and you'd like to have an abortion, the state will pay for it. And Alaska's pretty aggressive. Right now, about 45% of the abortions performed in Alaska are paid for by Medicaid. And that means the hardworking taxpayers of Alaska, unfortunately, some of their taxpayer money is going to fund abortions. And this Medicaid expansion will probably only make that worse. That the study I did estimates that if we expand Medicaid the way Governor Walker wants to, that's going to put about 10 to 15,000 additional women of childbearing age onto Medicaid, and they'll be covered by a plan that directly covers abortion. So I think you can see some pretty dramatic increases. Right now, there's about 1,800 abortions are performed in Alaska every year. Study after study after study shows that once you start funding abortion through taxpayer dollars, abortion numbers go up. So again, I think this could dramatically increase numbers of abortion in the state. And again, this Medicaid expansion should really concern pro-life people in the state.
So how many women on Medicaid in Alaska right now? Do you know?
Let's see here. I don't have the exact figures, but I think that expanding Medicaid will put about 40 to 50,000 more people on the rolls, and of those 50,000 or so, 10 to 15,000 will be women of childbearing age.
And with 1,800 abortions, 45% state-funded, right now we have almost 900 that the state's paying for. So it's probably going to be safe to say that we're going to have hundreds of more abortions performed in the state of Alaska at state expense, assuming that the governor gets his way.
I think that's a very safe statement. I mean, it's still not always easy to predict directly, but certainly it's going to make it a lot easier for a lot of women to get their abortions taxpayer-funded. And again, there's plenty of evidence that shows once the state starts paying for abortions, abortion numbers go up. Pro-life researchers agree with that. Pro-choice researchers agree. Guttmacher, which used to be Planned Parenthood's research arm, certainly no friend of the pro-life movement. They themselves admit, once you start paying for abortions through taxpayer dollars, the numbers do go up.
So you said that Alaska is one of 17 states that provides taxpayer-funded abortions, and you also commented that Alaska is pretty darn aggressive in that regard. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by aggressive with respect to tax-funded abortions.
Well, essentially, there's about, again, as I mentioned, 17 states, and some are a little more limited. I mean, some have kind of language. I mean, I never think it's a good idea. I mean, I think abortion is wrong in all circumstances. I'm never happy about seeing taxpayer dollars going to abortion. But some states do have some safeguards, or they will only pay for abortion under somewhat limited circumstances when the woman may be facing some kind of a health risk, or they fund it in somewhat limited circumstances. Alaska, I mean, the legislature has tried to put the brakes on it, and they keep getting struck down by the court. Again, many other states, the percentage of publicly funded abortions is lower. Like, for instance, in a state like Maryland, only about 15% of the abortions are publicly funded. A state like New Mexico, about 25% of the abortions are publicly funded. So that's what you kind of see in other states. Massachusetts, about 20%. Alaska, that's twice as much, 45%. So again, it just seems that the safeguards that are there in other states either aren't there or just aren't enforced. And again, Alaska seems pretty aggressive in its willingness to fund abortions through its state Medicaid program.
Dr. Michael New talking with us, a political science, master's degree in statistics from Stanford University, has written on the issue of the Medicaid expansion in Alaska. One of the comments you made that have been attempted restrictions struck down by the courts in the state, that's one of the biggest issues, and it's probably one of the reasons why Governor Walker is thinking that he can just by the swipe of a pen expand Medicaid without the cooperation of the legislature, because he knows that our activist courts here will back him up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on the judicial system in Alaska, but again, the reason why Alaska has taxpayer-funded abortion is because of a court ruling, and that's true of almost all the states. I think there's only 4 states in the whole country where the legislature or the voters actually voted for taxpayer funding of abortion. In Alaska, it was done largely by court order, and I'm not going to speculate. I don't know the current makeup of the judiciary in Alaska, but it does, frankly, seem from a distance that the courts seem pretty activist, pretty liberal. And that would lead me to think they may let Governor Walker get away with this. We'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, the selection process for judges in the state are pretty much controlled by the Bar Association in the sense that there's a judicial council composed of 3 citizen members, 3 attorney members, and then the Supreme Court justice who breaks any ties. So you basically have 4 members of the bar that decide. And generally, it's an okay selection process. My wife actually served as one of the 3 members on that commission or on that council. But boy, I'll tell you what, when it comes to actually selecting Supreme Court justices, welcome to politics. I mean, this idea that selection is effective, especially the type of philosophies that lead to the bad decisions on abortion that we have in this state, it reflects that the merit system is not immune from political activism. Really unfortunate, because this state is largely a pro-life state. And yet, like in so many other areas, like the gay marriage at the national level, the people's will is not followed. Rather, it becomes the elite's view that's imposed. But with respect to Governor Walker, his decision to accept the Medicaid expansion is his. If he decides to actually try to push this through executive order, he's the catalyst to this. He's responsible whether or not the courts back him up. And the fact is that he ought to be held accountable. And anybody out there that's listening that supported Governor Walker, that bought his claim of being pro-life, you need to throw this right back at him. This is absolutely atrocious. An expansion would result undeniably in more tax-funded abortions in this state. You ought to demand that, hey, you want to do the Medicaid expansion because you think it's important, because you think this is something important for those that need in the state because of whatever social welfare perspective you have, then you better also at the same time make sure you've got an executive order or something that limits access to tax-funded payer abortions. Of course, the problem, Dr. New, as you observed, is there's court orders that probably would prevent that even if you tried.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, quite honestly, people may need to find a way to amend the Alaska State Constitution in some way. I think that, obviously that's not going to be easy, but I think that probably is the pathway forward for pro-lifers. That's something that would have a lot of good effects. Again, if we can just turn off the funding of abortion through taxpayer dollars, the numbers will go down. So,
we have about 30, 40 seconds left. I mean, is that your recommendation for action, a constitutional amendment, or is there anything else that people can do here in the state to prevent this?
Well, I mean, I think legislatively, I think probably the pathway forward is probably through constitutional amendment. I don't know how that process works specifically, but that would be my recommendation. I think that's really the only way to really kind of get around some of these activist decisions.
Well, Dr. Michael New, I appreciate your focus on this issue here in Alaska. Keep up the good work. We look forward to you getting out an article maybe tonight. We'll put it up on restoringliberty.com about this new development. Thanks again for being on the Joe Miller Show.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Keep the good work.
Thank you. Stay with us, the Joe Miller Show, back after these messages.